After Reims, the cheers fell like leaves, beautiful for a moment, then underfoot. The council weighed each step the way a miser weighs a coin, turning victory into a reason to sit still. Jean asked for Paris while the embers were still hot enough to burn. They asked her to wait, to consider, to let the good news ripen into better news. Good news rots fast on a war road. She rode north anyway with the men who still believed that faith is a kind of speed. Paris greeted her with stone, guns, and water. She prayed in the mud, the sky low and hard, and ordered the ladders raised. Arrows stitched the air. Iron hissed and bit. A quarrel took her thigh and put her on the ground. She clenched her teeth and whispered that God's will had not changed. They dragged her from the ditch while the bells of Paris rang for the other side. The king declared patience a virtue. In palaces, patience is the word that teaches surrender to dress well. Autumn unrolled with rain that would not stop. The truce with Burgundy held in ink and nowhere else. She rode from fortress to fortress, from caution to refusal, armor dulled to a darker color. The white banner sagged with water and smoke. Men who had once followed her because they could breathe again began to stare like debtors. The voices still reached her, but softer now, as if speaking through cloth. Silence is a weapon when it is chosen. When it arrives uninvited, it is erosion. In Meung, she came to court as a soldier for the last time. Charles sat under fir, the room heavy with hearth heat and the quiet noise of favor-trading hands. She asked for men. He offered phrases. He spoke of negotiation and harvests, of taxes and time. She bowed and did not ask again. She had learned in Orléans that there are doors that only open to pressure. She had learned since Reims that there are doors that never open once a crown feels safe behind them. Compiègne called for help in a voice that sounded like water backing up against a gate. She answered with too few men and too much resolve. On the 23rd of May, 1430, the Burgundian banners darkened the afternoon like approaching weather. She stayed at the rear to hold the exit. The drawbridge began to rise before the last hoof struck timber. Chains rattled, wood groaned. Someone shouted her name with the kind of fear that arrives too late to be useful. She spurred forward and met arrows instead. Spears bit the flanks of her horse, hands pulled at the reins, mud closed over her face. When she rose, the flag above her was not hers, and the city's gates were a wall that had chosen not to remember. They moved her like a prize sealed in iron. Margny to Beaulieu to Beaurevoir, each stone room smaller, colder, nearer to the purpose everyone preferred not to name. At Beaurevoir, she climbed to a narrow window and looked down 3 stories into a yard that did not promise mercy. She prayed for a decision. She jumped. The wind turned her cloak into the ghost of wings and then folded it. She survived on a bed of pity and bruises. She called her escape a sin and called her recovery instruction. The voices did not scold. They did not soothe. They were present, and presence was enough. Jean de Luxembourg counted the offer from England the way a man counts water in a dry month. 10,000 livres for the girl who had moved a kingdom. He sold her, not in hatred, not in rage, in the ordinary arithmetic that keeps wars going. Burgundian honor found a price. English fear found a stage, and French gratitude found a reason to speak softly and elsewhere. Rouen took her with river breath and stone lungs. They chained her ankles and posted soldiers at the door. The room tasted of damp straw and resignation. The guards learned to stand within reach and outside confession. She kept her eyes down until prayer required she lift them. Each morning clerics arrived with questions sharpened to points. Each evening they left with answers that did not dull. It offended them that steel could be so calm. Bishop Pierre Cauchon wore crimson like a verdict in the shape of cloth. His faith loved forms, and the form he loved most was submission. He called her his daughter and meant object. He asked about voices and obeying and clothes. Were the voices male or female? Did they carry the smell of incense or sulfur? Did they speak French or the language of angels? She said they were good, that they commanded what was right, that they had never bought her anything except courage. He wrote the words down like stones placed in a wall. Whispers spread that the devil sat on the beam above her bed, that she spoke to ravens through the bars, that soldiers fainted when they looked into her eyes. Yet many believe these were garrison superstitions. A barracks need to clothe fear in spectacle. What cannot be disputed is that she asked to be moved to a church prison guarded by women, that she asked for mass, that she asked for confession. The court refused all three. They refused like men who have learned that mercy makes conclusions harder to write. The winter, slow and private, took strength from her bones and left her focus untouched. She warmed her hands on her breath and remembered fields, light, and the sound of bells. She learned the steps in the corridor by heart, who limped, who dragged, who carried keys that muttered to themselves. Guards tried to reach her with jokes, then with threats, then with the thin cruelty of boredom. She cut her hair again so that hands would have less to hold. The judges added the cutting back to the list they called sin. In March, they opened the tribunal in full. Rows of clerics, faces trained toward neutrality, ink ready, airflow poor. She stood at the center like a stake already planted. They asked whether she believed herself in God's grace. If she said yes, they would call it pride. If she said no, they would call it admission. She said that if she was not, she prayed God would place her there, and if she was, she prayed He would keep her. The court paused because there are answers that arrive so clean that they reflect as well as they illuminate. They pressed her on the armor, on the banner, on the sword from the altar. They asked whether she had demanded worship. She said she never asked for anything except what had been ordered of her. They called her stubborn. They brought the threat of torture into the room and showed her the tools that give pain a mechanical advantage. She looked at the table and said that even if her limbs were torn, she would still speak the truth. The scribe marked defiance. The air marked something else. In late May, they led her to a platform in the cemetery of Saint Ouen. Damp earth, lean crosses, a crowd that wanted relief dressed as edification. Cauchon read. She listened. They pushed a parchment at her and told her it meant safety. She could not read, and they knew it. She signed a mark. The dress arrived. They called it repentance. The English cheered because spectacle had paused, and men mistake pauses for endings when they have other tasks to attend to. For 3 days, she wore the dress they set out. Guards laughed through the night. Then they entered and took it away and left only men's clothing on the floor. She hesitated because hesitation is what happens in the space where obedience meets survival. She prayed because that is what happens when survival feels like a sin. She put the clothes on because the other choice offered her body to humiliation. In the morning, they wrote relapse. The ink was dry before the word left their mouths. Cauchon came back with witnesses, sorrow arranged upon his face like makeup. He spoke of the church as a mother. She spoke of God as a certainty. He asked if the voices still spoke. She said they did, and that they had never lied, although she had when she had signed. He wrote that down and did not let his hand tremble until after the door closed. They fixed the day. Carpenters stacked wood with a professionalism that refused to look like devotion. Barrels of pitch stood like dark altars. A stake rose from the square with clean lines and mute promise. The executioner checked his ropes and found them sound. He did not hate her. He hated mistakes. Dawn in Rouen arrived with a chew of fog and smoke. The crowd pressed the fences so hard the fences pushed back. She walked barefoot across the mud, lips moving in prayer that sounded like breath refusing to abandon itself. They gave her a small wooden cross. She kissed it and held it against her breast. A larger cross stood before the pyre, and when she saw it, she smiled once, a quick light through windows that had learned to hold shadows. They tied her to the stake with care that had nothing to do with kindness. A parchment of sentence, a murmur of final admonition, a pause to see whether the world itself would interrupt. It did not. The torch lifted, the straw caught, the wood followed, the air drew in and then gave back heat. She spoke the holy name until there was no air left to make names travel. The flame climbed and turned the morning into an hour that could be counted in sparks. Whispers spread even then that a white dove rose from the smoke, that her heart would not burn, that the letters of Jesus' name stood uncharred on charred cloth. Many believe these are consolations the city offered itself, not depositions. What cannot be disputed is that the ashes were raked, that fragments were shown as proof to men who required proof. that what remained was thrown into the river to deny relics to a people who needed them. The Seine took the last evidence and carried it through mills and meadows and out of sight. The crowd shifted from noise to the quiet that comes after a hard thing has finally finished doing what it promised. An English soldier crossed himself without meaning to. Another swore to remember and did not. The executioner kept his distance from the talk, later saying that he feared for his soul and did not mean that as poetry. The square emptied like a lung. Silence does not end a story. It sets its pitch. In France, a king sat beneath a crown that had cost him a courage he had rented and returned. He did not speak her name for years. In Domremy, a mother lit a candle and replaced it when it burned down, and replaced it again. On roads where she had ridden, men told each other in the dusk that faith could ride beside them the way wind does, invisible, undeniable. The English wrote reports and sealed them. The Burgundians balanced new accounts. Priests argued in rooms where their voices grew warm from friction. The old wound of a country kept trying to close and kept opening for other reasons. Whispers spread that villagers saw her at dusk on fields that had never known a banner, that she appeared to soldiers on lonely watchposts, that she spoke from water and from weather. Yet many believe the mind produces apparitions that match its need. What cannot be disputed is that children learned her name before they learned the histories that attempt to use names, and that mothers told them that obedience can be a sword if the hand that holds it does not shake. Years later, men would retry her on paper and absolve her. The ink could not heat the square that had cooled long ago. Sanctity would be spoken by men who were not there, and it would be received by crowds who would have come if it had been safer to come. Pain does not become smaller when it is blessed. It becomes legible to those who require letters. Her work did not end at the stake. It moved into mouths and hands that had watched and tried to remember the feeling of being awake. Orléans rang bells in May until sound grew heavy enough to lean on. Reims kept its oil polished by attention, not by cloth. Domremy held the shape of a girl kneeling and listening in grass that did not look different from other grass unless you already knew. The river that had taken ashes did not give them back, but it kept the rumor of them where reeds bend and boats slow. It was said later that heaven had sent a saint to save a king, that she was a witch dressed as a soldier, that she was a girl who mistook fervor for instruction, that she was a sword raised by a hand that did not belong to itself. Modern scholars view the extremes as rumor, not evidence. The true record shows a worker who obeyed, a country that needed obedience dressed as fire, and a machine of power that could not bear what it could not claim. Previously, bells called her. Finally, flames answered her. Between them lay the space in which a nation remembered how to say we and learned again how sharp that word can be. Was she saved by the voices she served, or did she become the voice a dying century needed in order to hear itself at last?